Well, happy Sunday, everyone, and welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. Kind of a reaction, kind of a review of what happened on Saturday night. We appreciate if you're watching over on YouTube or if you're listening in any of the podcast platforms. My name is Bryce Koon alongside Glen West. And Glen, we kicked this podcast off right before we hit the record button. Devastating news. We had heard it. We had heard the rumblings. You, myself, and Sonny had been texting about it. We had talked with multiple sources. But the big news, Jacobian Guillory tears his Achilles, season-ending injury. Arguably one of the more important players, if not one of the most important players on this roster in 2024. Glenn, just kind of give me your raw reaction to this news. And I know you just put up a piece on our site over at Go 24/7. People can check that out. But just where does LSU go from here, and how big of a loss is this?
Yeah, it's a huge loss. I mean, I think if you had kind of followed us during the fall and really kind of checked in, pretty consistently with us, we had told you about kind of the development that Jacobian Guillory had and had been making this fall. I think he had been probably one of LSU's most improved players on that side of the ball, and I think that this is obviously a really crushing blow for LSU to kind of not you know to lose him now for the entirety of the season. He's I think you can make the argument probably the most important loss in terms of guys that LSU really couldn't afford to watch go down with a knee injury or I should say not a knee injury, an Achilles injury like this, like
Mm,
a season-ending injury, especially this early in the season, just not what LSU needed at all. To be quite
yeah.
honest with you, and Guillory's a guy that had become such a great leader for this team. I think he's somebody that really would have helped you when you got into SEC play, because what have we been talking about for most of the offseason about LSU not filling a lot of their needs at that group, and you didn't have a whole lot of returning experience, and Guillory was the guy that was going to be the kind of returner and one that was asked to step up into a bigger role. And unfortunately, here we are sitting after two games, and he's now going to be shelled for the rest of the year. So, huge loss for LSU last night. Was definitely the one of the sore spots that we can talk about here, but. Several things did not go LSU's way in that first half. They didn't respond the way that I think a lot of people had hoped they would after such a crushing loss to USC. Still get the win, still kind of pull away at the end there, but lot of stuff that we can talk about in those first 35 minutes that should be a little bit alarming as we kind of head into the meat of SEC schedule coming up here shortly.
Yeah, for the folks that really wanted LSU to play a perceived cupcake game before getting into those week one matchups, not only do you struggle for 30, 35, 40 minutes, you also lose one of the most valuable players on your team. And so it's football. Look, I mean, you still have to line up and play these games. It doesn't matter the opponent. And Nicholls gave everything LSU could ask for and maybe more than they asked for. But obviously, the big news, Jacoby and Guillory out for the year. We'll obviously continue to cover that in this week and talk with BK about that this week and their plans for a college game day game now in Columbia, South Carolina, after the Gamecocks thrashed a Kentucky football team last Saturday. So let's talk a little bit about that first 30 minutes, Glenn. I've got the stats right here in front of me. I mean, yeah, Nicholls only had 295 yards of offense, but it was about as balanced could get. 150 on the ground, 145 coming from one of the best names in college football, Colin Guggenheim, which we joked if no tampering, but hey, if he's in the portal, well, why not take a look at him next year? 145 yards through the air. I thought that Pat McQuaid for Nicholls did enough to keep LSU honest in the passing game. They worked a lot of quick slants, a lot of out routes. Overall, though, I mean, Glenn, defensively, you wanted to go into this game with some questions answered, and I don't know if there's more questions that we need answered after this game, or if it's just the same thing over and over again, rinse and repeat that we've seen. The run defense was not great. Kelly talked a little bit about that, and he kind of mostly honestly deferred to, I've got to go look at the film. So maybe that's something we ask him later in the week. But how would you assess this defense? I don't know. Is there more questions we have after this game, or is it just the same rinse and repeat thing over and over again?
Well, I had thought that LSU's defense had made some real strides last week against USC. I mean, I thought that they played pretty well in the front seven, and they were able to get some pressure on Miller Moss. They clamped down on the USC rushing attack pretty well, and I thought we're making some really nice strides last week. I don't think last week the defense was the reason that you lost the game against USC, but um, last night was a complete reversion back to kind of what we saw a lot of last year, and they were not able to get off the field in that first half, and that's kind of what Brian Kelly alluded to after the game that he was most disappointed in. Back-to-back 13-play drives for Nicholls State,
Yeah.
where LSU just really was not able to get much push up front. Nicholls State was able to throw in some trick plays and kind of, honestly, I wouldn't go as far as to say embarrass LSU's defense, but make them look a little silly at times. I mean,
Mhm.
there were some missed tackles, there were some missed run fits by the safeties and the linebackers, and we can talk about the linebackers because I do think that's going to be a fascinating story to now watch here over the next week or two. But they got zero push, and
Yeah.
a week after we were talking about the offensive line not having any push for the run game, which that continued, of course. But the defensive line and the linebackers and really the entire defense was not able to get much push on a Nicholls State offense that you would expect that group to dominate. I mean, let's just
Yeah.
face it. LSU has bigger bodies. They have guys that were highly recruited to come in here and make those kinds of plays and shut teams like that down. And to have 21 points, 2 minutes, 3 minutes into the third quarter, and have this be a 2 point game, it's inexcusable. And Brian
Mhm.
Kelly gave the kind of, we were a little tired after the game. Fans do not want to hear that. Like, that is the
Yeah.
absolute last thing you want to hear from your head coach week 2 into the 2024 season, that we were on a little bit of a short week, and the guys were tired. Like, that should not have been the thing that he said after that game. He should have said we should have had him more prepared. We should have had him coached up better. It's on us. And he did say it was on the coaching. Like, he did say the coaching needs to be better. And I think he was specifically talking about the run game and kind of the diversity they can have on offense there that needs to improve. But man, like that to me, I thought was an alarming statement to make, especially so close after a game like that where you just did not really perform all that well. I Fans don't want to hear that excuse. We've heard with that message, that point has been thrown up all over our board
Yeah.
this morning, and I agree. Like, I was a little bit surprised that he said that, but this is still at the end of the day a defense that has. We knew coming in that the personnel wasn't going to be different. It was just how much of a change could the coaching staff have on the guys that were already here. I think we're learning pretty quickly that LSU is going to need to make some pretty significant changes again, personnel wise, next year. I mean, they've got a great class that is already committed and seem to be pretty intact in terms of sticking with their commitments until December. But this is going to be a process. Like, I thought a couple of the young guys played well. I thought PJ Woodland gave you some really nice snaps. I thought Deshaun Spears came in and gave you some nice snaps. Whit Weeks, I thought, was probably the best player on defense yesterday. And
Yeah.
we can talk a little bit more about linebackers, like I said, but just a pretty inexcusable to allow 21 points there and to have Nicholls kind of control the clock. I mean, after the first half, Nicholls had the ball for 19 minutes of that first half, and LSU had it for like 11 or 12. I mean, it was a huge disparity there, and LSU was scoring. Like, LSU's offense, their passing offense, I thought was solid, and Nussmeier, 6 touchdowns, tied the record for, or tied, I think, second best record for touchdown passes in a game for LSU.
Mhm.
Um, but man, like, to have the defense kind of revert back to what they were in large parts last year against an opponent like Nicholls was very demoralizing, rough to see. I mean, we were up there in the booth in the press box for the first 30, 35 minutes, and I was talking with a bunch of different reporters up there. It's like, what is going on? Like, how is this happening to this defense right now, where
Yeah.
they just cannot get off the field? So yeah, can feel the frustration certainly from the fan base, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on this team this weekend because South Carolina just put a licking on Kentucky, an SEC school, and they're coming back here with a lot of momentum in Columbia, and LSU better be strapping on their big boy pants for this one because they've got to show they've got to come out better than they did this last weekend, or else they'll be down big time by the half.
You hit on a couple points right there that I wanted to kind of just flesh out before we get to that linebacker position, which I think is one of the topics that we didn't talk a lot about in fall camp because everyone's like, "Hey, it's going to be a really good unit. 2 games in, we're not really sure what to make of it." You mentioned the young guys. Look, Glenn, I'm just going to say this, and I don't. This is not an indictment on the character of any young man that's on this roster or anything like that. I do not believe that LSU has the guys to be able to do it, to be able to compete with where they are, the expectation level is. I just think that it's like you mentioned, it's going to be a process. The younger guys are probably more talented, but they don't have the game reps. They don't have the game experience. So it's really a catch 22. It's do you let these young guys, learn on the fly, which I think if LSU is going to be competitive for a playoff spot this year, you're going to have to see a lot of these young guys. PJ Woodland is probably going to have to take more snaps than some of the other veterans on this roster because he might be the better option. So they're going to have to figure this out. And the problem is, Glenn, in this game against Nicholls, that was where you wanted to figure it out.
Yeah.
And just a disappointing defensive effort. We talked about that, like things you wanted to see. I'll kind of just elaborate a little bit on the Brian Kelly's comments of we were tired. Look, I get it. I mean, he kind of even fleshed it out more in the press conference last night when someone asked him the question of, "Can you walk us through a little bit what that was like?" And he said, "We didn't get back till 5 a.m." And Glenn, he kind of got halfway through that answer, and then he turned and said, "But I'm not going to make an excuse." Well,
Yeah.
the problem is in the scheme of social media nowadays and everything, and all of us tweeting out that quote, it doesn't matter. You've already gone so far to say a certain thing, you can't really backtrack on that.
Well, he
So
said it twice. He said it
yeah, he
initially,
said
and
it
then
twice.
the first thing out of his mouth was almost the exact same kind of thing. So, like, you thought that was kind of his answer, and he backtracked it a little bit, which I think a good coach or a good speaking coach should be able to do. And yeah, look, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but he
No, you're
doubled
good.
down on that take when it was
Yeah.
asked about him in a question. So
Yeah, and it is what it is. It's going to take a life of its own, and I'm sure Monday there might be some course correction, like there was last week in the post game presser, and then in that Tuesday presser, the first one of the week. But let's talk about linebackers, Glenn. I don't think it's a secret. Where is Harold Perkins? I mean, if we just want to get to the nitty gritty, Whit Weeks. I mean, the reason that we see Whit Weeks and we see that jersey number flying across the field, I think, is because the guy is going to go out of his way to try and make plays. Now, could that hurt you at times? We talked with the linebackers about that last night. Greg Penn said sometimes guys are trying to go out of their way to make plays because they feel like other parts of the defense are suffering, maybe not being able to make plays. Maybe that's where Whit Weeks fits that role, flying around, running around. My grandfather used to say this, running around like a chicken with your head cut off. He grew up on a farm, and that's what they did, I guess. So, it's one of those things. But where is Harold Perkins? I mean, this is a guy that, Glenn, you kind of have to remind yourself, and you and I talked about this on the field before we headed into the post-game presser. You kind of have to remind yourself this guy's wearing number 7 and he's on the field because outside of the, you know, penalty that he got late in the game, boneheaded, you can't have that. Like you just can't have that type of non-discipline on the football field. It just feels like they're not getting the most out of what he can do, and we keep talking about it, but when is it going to happen? And I know it's 2 weeks into this season, but I don't know. It just feels like it has to happen sooner or later because you can't just keep hoping week in, week in, week in, and week out because that's what we did last year.
yeah, and look, in the fall, I think the media, were probably suckered into a little bit of it because we saw it for a couple weeks, 3 week stretch there. I thought Harold Perkins is one of their better players, or was their best player on defense, and it wasn't even close. Like, he was
Yeah,
making plays every practice and getting batted balls and breaking into the backfield on running plays. I think now, with a little bit of hindsight, we can see that we were not paying enough attention to the run game deficiencies, and more so on, that's just a great play by Harold Perkins, getting in the backfield there and making
yeah,
that play. Like, I think, there was a little bit of that going on for sure. But man, yeah, I am in total agreement there. And look, he led the team in tackles last week against USC, and I thought he actually did play a good first quarter and a half against USC. But really, in the second half, he disappeared in that game too. We're kind of in crunch time when you needed him. You didn't see a whole lot of him, and
Yeah.
I think this week it was not so much to me about how he performed. It's more about how LSU used him in terms of snaps.
Yeah.
His snaps were down last night
Yeah.
against Nicholls. I mean, Sonny posted it up on our board today. He had 48 snaps. Whit Weeks had 39. West Weeks had 16. I think Greg Penn was around 50 or so. Like those snap counts were down, and Nicholls was a team that, like I said, moved the ball extremely well in the first half. Like they got a lot of plays in that first half in particular, and yeah, LSU's defense was able to kind of shut them down in the second half for the most part. But that is a sign to me that LSU is going much more balanced here. They love what the Weeks brothers are giving them right now at those inside linebacker spots, and somebody's going to ask it to him. If the mic gets to me on Monday, I'll ask him about Harold Perkins. But it's been the same thing that we've heard from BK for like the last couple weeks. They're not moving him. Like I don't think they're moving him
Yeah.
again, unless you want to create like that star role and let him be the star or something like that. I just don't see that happening after 2 games. But yeah, like he has not been fitting the run all that well. He's been, on those running plays right up the gut. He's out of position and not really making much of an effort to get into the play on those runs. I mean, he's been kind of, he's been schemed around, I think is the best
Yeah.
way to put it. Um, and for a guy who is so good at getting into the backfield and creating havoc, as Blake Baker would say, that's been a very alarming sign on defense for me. I think we have to start wondering whether or not Perkins is kind of the guy that he was hyped up to be at this point. I mean, like he's just not had a whole lot of success, this season so far, and it's still early, and he can still pull it together. And I think this is a good opportunity against South Carolina to go out and say, hey, I'm here, I'm still able, I'm willing and able to make these plays, and I can make this kind of a game changing kind of momentum for my defense. But you're right. For a guy who's wearing number 7 right now, if you didn't know who it was that was, wearing the jersey, you wouldn't notice him really. I mean, he's just
Yeah.
been kind of quiet these first couple weeks. So hopefully they can get something schemed up to where he can make more of an impact going forward. Those are conversations that are happening right now about how to best utilize him. But very, very disappointing, honestly, that we're sitting here again. It was the same conversation we had after Florida State last week. Is like, does LSU need to consider moving him around a little bit more, or trying to find a different position for him? Like, it's just been very weird that we're sitting here now in year 3, and it doesn't feel like LSU's fully realized or kind of figured out the best course of action for him to have an impact on a game to game basis. So yeah, that's a very concerning thing for me.
Greg Penn, consummate professional. We got the chance to talk to him a lot in post game, and I even asked him. I said, "Greg, once again, welcome to the post game presser, where you were a reoccurring figure for us last year." And Greg speaks so well to the media. And I said, we talked a lot with you last year about communication. Was that a factor tonight, or is it something else? And he was straight up. He said, I just think it. He said, I think it's an effort thing. He said, I think it is which kind of alluded to what you said, Glenn. I think it's an effort thing. He goes, I think it's guys just not doing their job. And Glenn, look, we're in the media. We're not supposed to be fans. I will tell you, I love covering Greg Penn because he just kind of shoots you straight with and I appreciate that as a media member. But at some point, everything's starting to sound like a broken record. And like this Harold Perkins dilemma and the defense in general, which I think the defense can improve. And it's probably not as bad as it was, against Nicholls, and probably not as good as it looked against USC at times, probably somewhere in the middle. But this whole idea of guys just not doing their job, I don't know where you.
We heard that last year. It was a
Yeah,
very common theme last year.
yeah, I don't. My question is, Glenn, is like, where does that who stops that? Like, where does the buck end? Is that a Blake Baker thing? Is that a Brian Kelly thing? Like, at what point are you in the film room and say, hey, and let's just use people for example. Once again, I have not dissected the film and looked at this yet, but hey, Wit, you got to stop going over here and trying to make a play because your assignment's here. Or hey, Greg, or hey, Major. And once again, not singling anybody out because I don't know exactly who it is, but that seems to be an issue that has not fixed itself from last year. And look, when you play better competition, like I'm just going to be frank, when Ole Miss rolls into town in October, they might light you up if you do that. They will light you up if you do that. Alabama, the same thing. South Carolina this weekend, they've got a Lenora Sellers, pretty good quarterback. So I don't know, Glenn. I mean, maybe it's too aggressive in that sense. I just don't know where the trend or the buck stops with that comment and that remark. Not anything against Greg, but it just seems to be another reoccurring theme of, well, we're just guys are playing out of position. Well, I mean, that seems like to me it's a
Yeah.
top down type of issue.
Yeah, I don't really know where else to go with that other than to say it's maybe a personnel thing. Like, I mean, if we're sitting here and we're talking about the same things, that we were talking about last year, you have to start to wonder, like, okay, well, is it the coaches or is it just guys just not getting the message? And we heard all
Yeah.
offseason about how these guys love playing for Blake Baker. I think that there's still a lot of untapped potential in this defense that they can unlock. But they got to get the stuff between the ears fixed. Like
Yeah.
they can't have mental lapses. They didn't allow a whole ton of explosive plays last night outside of that one Guggenheim third down run or 67-yard touchdown run.
Yeah.
That was probably the one play, and it's the one that sticks with you because it happened.
Mhm.
But I thought that they limited the explosive plays, and they were able to get off the field in the second half, which I thought was necessary and good. But look, you had a stretch there where you really struggled to get off the field, and
All right. USC had 3 third downs in week 1 conversions. I thought that was one of the better things that LSU's defense was able to do was get off the field. Um, Nicholls had 3 first downs after the first half, 3 third down conversions after the first half. I think they were 3 for 5, and they had a 4th down conversion, I believe, as well. They were able to move the ball in LSU's defense, and now that you're down Jacobian Guillory and you've got a number of guys that you're going to need to step up on the interior D line, it's going to be more important than ever that these safeties and these linebackers and these corners are helping that defensive line, fit the run and get as much push as they can going
Yeah.
forward, because that's going to be a huge question mark as we move into the start of SEC play.
We'll kind of end it with the offensive side of the football here, Glenn, as we kind of take a turn. I mean, look, Garrett Nussmeier was good. I mean, he was
Yeah.
really good, made good decisions. 6 touchdowns, 302 yards passing. I thought he battled well. I mean, obviously wasn't 100% after what was either a cramp or came up a little bit, limping. But here's the thing, Glenn. I mean, and I'm just going to be brutally honest about this. He's not Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels and this LSU offense has been dependent on the quarterback running the football for the past several years. They're not going to have that to the extent of what they have had. Nussmeier showed he can move around the pocket. He can use his legs. But Glenn, I'm going to read this off to you. Josh Williams, 4 carries, 19 yards. Caleb Jackson, 9 carries, 19 yards. Nussmeier, 2 for 13. Caden Durham, 4 for 9. Ricky Collins, who saw a little time in action there, not in mop-up duty, but just in general, 2 for 4. Glenn, that's not acceptable. And I fear that it's going to eventually, if they can't get this corrected, have a negative impact on Garrett Nussmeier, who isn't what Jaden Daniels is. They are not asking him to be that. The problem is this offensive line that grades out so well in pass, protection cannot get a consistent push in the run game. I was listening to some kind of local radio on the way home last night, and one of the it was a former LSU player that was kind of on one of the late post game shows, and he said that if you go watch them now, I'm gonna have to go back and watch this, and I don't know if you've picked up on this, and you can give your thoughts. A lot of them play very high, which was obviously how you would want to play in pass coverage. So they practice and drill that so much, and they've gotten to the point where they really haven't had a running game outside of a running back consistently or complementary to what they can do with a quarterback. That it's probably ingrained, and it's such a veteran offensive line. How much can we really expect for them to change at this point in their careers? Because the interior guys, 4-year, 5-year players, the exterior guys, I mean, they're first round picks potentially, but I don't know, Glenn. I mean, I think I'm disappointed with the way the offensive line is played, and that could be an issue that plagues the rest of the offense if it doesn't get corrected.
Yeah, I mean, you could say game one was an anomaly, but when it happens in game two as well, it's a trend. And right now, the run game, from the running back's perspective, from the offensive line perspective, from the play calling perspective, and just how bland it is. Kind of just run it right up the gut, or run it between the guard and the tackle, run it between the other guard and the tackle. There's just not a whole lot there that's working, and I think it's important to throw out that LSU's I think outside of the John Emery run that he had against USC in that one drive where they scored a touchdown, that one drive where he had 49 yards, I believe, on the ground. LSU's averaging 3.1 yards a carry as a running back unit. I think it's I wrote about it this morning and kind of looked at the numbers, and I'm trying to find them here right now. 44 carries for 127 yards, so not even 3 yards a carry. It's 2.9. So it's just, you can't move the ball like that. Like it's not going to be sustainable. I mean, when you ask this passing offense, which again, and I hate for this pod to be such a Debbie Downer of a pod because there were some good things that happened in this game. Like we have to talk about what went wrong here, and I think we should maybe make this a little longer so we do kind of finish it with a little bit of a positive note. But yeah, look, the running game was just not there again. And for this offensive line, these running backs to not find running lanes and blow up some big plays against a team like Nicholls, which again, don't want to disparage Nicholls. They came out and they were physical. They were ready to play. And I think they drove home very very soundly after that game. I think they will take that 100 times out of 100, being able to keep up with LSU the way that they did. But it's on LSU. Like, it's on everybody to get this right. And BK kind of put it on the coaching staff at the end of the game. He's done that several times now over the last week or two. We'll see. We'll see if anything changes here, but you're absolutely right. Like, I think that was a great point that was made by one of our board members, and I can't remember who it was that made it. But yeah, they're blocking high. And when you block high, you just don't have the same kind of leverage to make a push in the run game like you need to. And it's concerning. It's alarming. It's a sound the alarm bells kind of ordeal right now for this run game, because the offense has been able to move. Like, they've been able to move in between the 20s. I thought last night they did a really nice job of finishing in the red zone. They had 5 red zone trips. They scored touchdowns on all 5 of those possessions. But all 8 touchdowns this offense has scored have come off the arm of Garrett Nussmeier in the passing game. And you've just got to find some balance with the run game. You've got to be able to punch it in down at the goal line with these running backs. You've got to be able to, when it gets inside the 10, the 5, to be able to toss it to Caleb Jackson, or toss it to Josh Williams, or Caden Durham, or Jawan Johnson, and say, just go get us in the end zone. Like, up front, go make a couple blocks, open up a hole. Running backs see the hole, run through it, get the touchdown. And it's just not been there these first couple weeks. And South Carolina, I believe, held Kentucky this last weekend to around 3 yards a carry. It's going to be a challenge again. It's going to be a good run defense. It's going to be another challenge for LSU to try to find some balance in this offense, because you're right. Nussmeier is a very good passing quarterback. I think he's shown that he can be a very successful passing quarterback in this league. But he's got to have the right kind of run game to balance it out. And it's just, we haven't seen it yet. I'll be curious to see what they look like against South Carolina. But I like what they're doing with the passing game. I think that they have been creative there. I think one guy I'd love to see get even more touches than he's getting right now is Xavier Thomas. I mean, he had five catches for 50 yards, was a menace in the return game last night. But he's somebody that I would love to see even in the backfield a little bit more often. Like get him out on get him out on the perimeter out of the backfield and toss it to him out in the flat and let him go make a couple plays for you on the perimeter that way. Aaron Anderson's another guy that could do that. There's a lot of speed. There's a lot of diversity in these skill position players that I feel like they can get more out of maybe what they've been getting so far. So going to be very interesting to see kind of how this offense can come together after, look, two two performances where you had some good stuff happen for you, but also some very negative stuff happened. I think it's still too early to call what this offense is, just because there's been some good, but there's also been some bad. If they can snap this trend in the run game, I think this can be a very explosive offense that has a lot of success, but we just have to see it first, and we haven't so far.
Yeah, you mentioned Xavion Thomas. That's a guy, a weapon. Glenn, it was so nice to see someone return kicks and return punts and
There was
potentially
yeah.
split the field at times for you, which
Yeah.
helped a lot.
Yeah, there was that punt that happened yesterday in the first half where it bounced a couple times. There were a bunch of Nicholls players around it, and Xavion went and dove for it and got a couple yards. And I turned around. I think I told you and a couple other of our beat reporters that if any other player had tried that the previous couple of years, it was going to be 6 points the other way. And I think that just shows the level of confidence that LSU has in Xavion Thomas to go make those special teams plays. And I think he'll do some really great things, but I'd love to see him touch the ball 9-10 times a game and not just 5. I think he's somebody that absolutely can blow things open for you offensively, and has to be somebody that you build around, and along with Kyron Lacey and CJ Daniels and Chris Hilton if he gets back healthy, Aaron Anderson. Like, these are all guys that can go make plays for you. It's just about getting enough creative diversity in the playbook and these guys going out and making those plays that kind of helps move this offense into a more consistent trajectory.
Yeah, and a lot of balance there too, Glenn. Kyron Lacey, 5 catches. Aaron Anderson, 5 catches. Thomas, 5. CJ Daniels, 4 for 71. Mason Taylor, 4 for 40. Juwan Johnson, who I thought was exciting to watch and a really good athlete. I was down on the field doing some photos and video, and I mentioned to you and a couple other reporters, Juwan Johnson was pumped, to say the least, after he got that touchdown and very confident in his abilities. And why not? I mean, this kid was a Max Preps finalist of the year in the country. One of the best players in the country. And I think Brian Kelly and Joe Sloan and this entire offensive minded staff is looking at it and saying, hey, that's a guy. And he mentioned he was going to be on special teams, didn't really have an opportunity defensively to play in year one. Let's move on to the offensive side of the football, and he could be electric. So, Glenn, we're seeing obviously more balance, which is what we expected through the passing game after it was just kind of a healthy dose of Neighbors and Thomas last season. You're seeing some of that balance, and so I think that's a good thing too. If this run game can get it kicked into gear offensively, that could unlock some things and it would kind of obviously be very interesting. But hey, like the way CJ Daniels fought through some contact, some physical catches that he made at the point of attack. Kyron Lacey is just a dude. And I think that it's going to continue to show. Glenn, I was in the end zone where he landed awkwardly. Literally just think that way he got the wind knocked out of him. He kind of kept holding his back a little bit. Obviously continued to play in the football game. And then Aaron Anderson, that's such a nice sight to see that guy really get involved along with Xavion Thomas there as well. And then obviously Mason Taylor. So offensively, they've got some things they can work on. And it's going to be fun. It's going to set up for a fun matchup in Columbia, South Carolina this upcoming weekend. College game day is going to be there. The AP poll just came out. Glenn, I haven't seen it. I think South Carolina snuck into the top 25, but I'd have to go and look at the time of we're recording this. But obviously, it's a new week, and we'll see what LSU can do. Any final thoughts from you, Glenn, as we get ready for another game week?
No, I mean,
I'd love to see some of these things start to trend LSU's way against South Carolina. I'd love to see them kind of snap out of a couple of these consistent issues that have plagued them so far. And whether it's fitting the run a little bit better, getting the run game off the ground in Columbia, seeing these running backs break a couple big runs. John Emery has LSU's only 20-plus yard run this season so far. Caleb Jackson's longest is 12. I think Josh Williams' longest is 12. They have got to get some explosive plays out of these running backs, and I think the South Carolina game would be a great chance to try to do that because I think everyone wants to look ahead to that October 12th game against Ole Miss, and that's going to be obviously a big telltale sign. But you got to get there first. You got to get there with only one loss, and I think if you kind of make these small steps now, then I think you can kind of get into a better position. Defensively, I'd love to see Zy Alexander continue to up his reps and snaps. He talked with us last night about how much better he's been feeling the last couple of weeks, and I think you could see that with some of his plays in the second half. I think you get him back in the mix with Ashton Stamps, with PJ Woodland at cornerback. I think that's a really solid trio that you can kind of lean on. And then it kind of works itself out with the way the safeties are playing right now as well, with a number of guys that I think you could see get some action, whether it's Deshaun Spears. They're not going away from Sage Ryan and from Jordan Gilbert. Like, those guys are veterans, and we know how this staff feels about getting the veteran players on the field, and you're going to see a lot of Major Burns too going forward. You just want to see these guys not miss tackles. You want to see them run fit. You want to see them make plays, not allow big explosive plays in front of them, or get behind them, I should say. So there's just a lot of different areas here where LSU can improve, and I think has the players or the coaching staff to maybe get more out of it than we've seen so far. But then again, I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong, and LSU goes out here and struggles again and is in another slugfest. And I would imagine this is going to be a very tight game. Unless LSU goes out there and it's just not ready to play. South Carolina is going to throw everything it has at them, and I think this is going to be a very close one.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's going to be interesting to kind of see where this game stands. It's going to be very, very interesting. LSU, South Carolina this upcoming week. This is the Nicholls reaction. Obviously, if you made it through this far, pretty negative, pretty Debbie Downer, but there are some things you can take away. Hopefully, we have something better to talk about next Sunday. But hey, thanks so much for watching, tuning into the podcast. Make sure you subscribe on all platforms, and we'll catch you on the message boards. We'll catch you over on Go 24/7. You can click that link down below for more written and video content as well. Thanks so much for watching the Go 24/7 podcast.